The chronometer stopped at 8:17, but no one remembers winding it that morning. November 7th, 1872. New York Harbor. The Mary Celeste sits heavy in the water, her hold filled with 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol bound for Genoa. Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a man whose very name seemed destined for the sea, makes his final preparations. His wife Sarah folds their daughter's small dresses into the cabin trunk. 2-year-old Sophia Matilda plays with the ship's cat, whom she calls Pooh. I am the keeper of maritime records, the one who catalogues the ships that never quite come home. Tonight I hold the Mary Celeste's final manifest in my hands. The paper should be yellowed by now, but somehow it still feels warm. The chronometer ticks once, then falls silent. Have you ever wondered why a perfectly seaworthy ship gets abandoned by its crew in the middle of the ocean? How an entire family, a captain, his wife, their baby daughter, simply vanishes without leaving so much as a footprint in the salt spray. The Mary Celeste wasn't just any vessel. She was cursed from her very first breath. Built in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, as the Amazon in 1861, her maiden voyage ended with her first captain dying of pneumonia before they had even cleared the Bay of Fundy. The young man's widow rushed to the wharf, expecting her husband's return. Instead, she found his body being carried ashore. The chronometer's brass catches imaginary moonlight, but that was just the beginning. Over 11 years, the Amazon, later renamed Mary Celeste, would run aground, collide with other ships, be abandoned on rocks, seized by creditors, and sold at auction. 6 captains would command her before Briggs, each one touched by misfortune. Notice what the records don't say here. They never mention why she kept finding new owners. Who buys a ship that destroys careers? The chronometer sits on Captain Briggs's desk as he writes his final letter home. Our vessel is in beautiful trim, and I hope we shall have a fine passage. But I have never been in her before, and can't say how she'll sail. He had never been in her before. Those words, they feel too heavy for coincidence. Sarah Briggs writes to her mother-in-law from their cabin. We seem to have a very good mate and steward, and I hope I shall have a pleasant voyage. The ink is still wet when she seals the envelope. She'll never send another letter. The chronometer ticks again, uncertain. The crew of 7 includes 2 German brothers, Volkert and Boy Lorentzen, who lost all their belongings in a previous shipwreck. They board with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The first mate, Albert Richardson, is from Maine. The cook, Edmund Head, married just before the voyage, like Captain McLean had 11 years earlier. 10 souls in total. A captain who'd invested his own money in the ship's renovation. A wife who trusted her husband's judgment. A baby who called the ship's cat by a silly name. 7 experienced sailors who'd chosen to follow Briggs across the Atlantic. The chronometer's minute hand hesitates. On November 5th, they were ready to sail, but fog and wind kept them anchored off Staten Island for 2 nights. Sarah wrote in her diary about playing their melodeon, about entertaining her brother and his wife aboard the ship, about how Captain Briggs considered sending for their 8-year-old son Arthur, telling him to skip school and join them. He didn't send for the boy. That decision, it saved one life at least. November 7th. The weather clears. The Mary Celeste raises anchor and sets out into the Atlantic. 8 days later, the Dei Gratia, a similar brigantine, departs from Hoboken, following the same route to Genoa. The chronometer's face reflects nothing. The Dei Gratia's captain, David Morehouse, may have known Briggs. They were both experienced mariners, both carrying dangerous cargo across the same treacherous waters. But the Dei Gratia carried petroleum, and the Mary Celeste carried alcohol. One ship would complete its journey. The other would become the most famous ghost ship in maritime history. The chronometer stops ticking entirely. Tonight, you'll learn what the Atlantic remembers and why some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. The chronometer measures time. But what happens when time itself becomes unreliable? December 4th, 1872. The Dei Gratia cuts through Atlantic swells about 400 miles east of the Azores. Captain Morehouse spots sails on the horizon, 5 miles off the port bow. Through his spyglass, he sees a ship sailing erratically, no one visible on the deck. The chronometer's brass tarnishes slightly. If you've ever watched a ship from a distance, you know how it should move. Purposeful, steady, responding to wind and current with human intention. But this vessel, she drifts like a leaf, her sails hanging in tatters. The Dei Gratia tries to signal the mystery ship. No response. Captain Morehouse orders his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, to take 2 men and investigate. They row across the gap between vessels, the Atlantic stretching endlessly beneath their small boat. What they found defied every rule of the sea. The Mary Celeste was completely abandoned. Not a soul on board, not even the ship's cat that little Sophia had loved. The vessel was seaworthy, her cargo intact. 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, barely touched. 6 months' worth of food and water still in storage. The chronometer's hands point to different hours. But here's what the initial reports didn't emphasize. What makes this discovery so unsettling? The ship's pumps were in perfect working order, yet 3.5 feet of water sloshed in the hold. Some sails were furled properly, others hung in shreds. The ship's register, sextant, chronometer, and navigation book were missing. The lifeboat was gone. First Mate DeVoe found the captain's cabin in disarray, personal belongings scattered. A sword beneath the bed, later tested and found to have no traces of blood, despite wild theories. The beds had been slept in but not made, suggesting the crew left early in the morning, shortly after waking. The chronometer reflects a face that isn't there. Most chilling of all, the impression of 2-year-old Sophia was still visible on her small bed. The indentation of a child who would never wake up again. The ship's log ended on November 25th, 10 days before the Dei Gratia found her. The final entry placed the Mary Celeste just 6 miles northeast of Santa Maria Island in the Azores, but she was discovered 500 miles away from that position. How does a ship sail 500 miles with no crew? The log slate, a temporary chalkboard where daily notes were made before being transcribed, had the beginning of an entry for November 25th. But when DeVoe took command of the ghost ship, he inadvertently erased those final words. Captain Briggs's last thoughts lost forever to the Atlantic. The chronometer's minute hand moves backward. Notice what she doesn't say here. the Mary Celeste herself. Ships are supposed to tell stories through their damage, their wear, their scars. But this vessel spoke only in absences. Missing people, missing equipment, missing explanations. The weather had been rough. Both ships' logs confirm violent storms in the weeks leading up to November the 25th. The Mary Celeste had been battened down, her windows covered with boards and canvas, but the cabin skylight was propped open, letting rainwater soak everything below. Why would experienced sailors leave a skylight open during a storm? Captain Morehouse faced a decision. Under maritime law, he could claim salvage rights to the derelict vessel and her valuable cargo, but first he had to get both ships safely to Gibraltar. 600 miles away, through winter Atlantic storms, with skeleton crews. The chronometer shows impossible times. DeVoe took command of the Mary Celeste with just 2 men. They pumped out the hold, repaired what they could, and set sail for Gibraltar. Despite rough weather, both ships reached port within a day of each other. The Dei Gratia on December 12th, the Mary Celeste on December 13th. But their arrival raised more questions than it answered. The authorities were suspicious. How convenient that the Dei Gratia should find a valuable derelict ship in the middle of the Atlantic. How fortunate that Captain Morehouse might know Captain Briggs. How profitable that salvage rights could be claimed. The chronometer's face clouds over. A salvage court hearing began on December 17th. Chief Justice Sir James Cochrane presided. Gibraltar's Attorney General, Frederick Solly Flutt, believed he knew the truth. The crew had gotten drunk on the alcohol cargo, murdered Captain Briggs and his family, then staged the abandonment. But the alcohol was denatured, poisonous to drink. The cargo was virtually untouched. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of violence. The crew's belongings were still neatly stowed away. The chronometer ticks once, uncertainly. This discovery led directly to something more disturbing than murder or mutiny. It led to the realization that 10 people had simply vanished from a perfectly sound ship in the middle of the ocean, leaving behind only questions and the echo of a chronometer that no one remembered winding. But what does this mean for the final morning? November 25th, when Captain Briggs made his last log entry and then stopped writing forever. The chronometer keeps ship's time, but some moments exist outside of time entirely. To understand what happened on November 25th, you must first understand the Mary Celeste herself. She wasn't just unlucky. She was a vessel that seemed to attract misfortune like iron filings to a magnet. The chronometer's brass grows warm. Built in 1861 as the Amazon, her launching at Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, was ordinary enough. Joshua Dewis, the shipbuilder, chose the name himself, perhaps thinking of the warrior women of Greek mythology. She was 99 feet long, 25 feet wide, constructed from spruce, pine, birch, and beech woods. A solid vessel built to last. But lasting and thriving are different things entirely. Her first captain, Robert McLean, was a newlywed. He fell ill with pneumonia before the Amazon even cleared the Bay of Fundy. The ship turned back to Spencer's Island, where McLean died in the home of one of the ship's owners. His young bride rushed to the wharf, expecting her husband's return. Instead, she watched his body being carried ashore. The chronometer reflects a widow's tears. The Amazon's second voyage began with a collision in the Strait of Dover. A British brig sank, her crew rescued by the Amazon. Then came years of routine cargo runs, lumber to London, goods to Portugal, corn from Baltimore to Halifax. Nothing remarkable, except for the steady accumulation of small disasters. In 1867, everything changed. Captain William Thompson commanded the Amazon when she docked in Halifax with a cargo of corn. The owners in Spencer's Island had grown dissatisfied with Thompson and sent word to relieve him of duty. But Thompson had other plans. The chronometer's hands spin wildly. He discharged George Spicer, one of the owner's sons who'd been serving as crew, and sailed north to Cape Breton. There, he claimed the ship ran aground in a winter gale and was severely damaged. The insurance company refused to pay because their policy specifically prohibited sailing around Cape Breton after November 1st. Thompson had scammed the owners out of their ship. Within a week, the wrecked Amazon was purchased by Alexander McBean and registered to Sydney, Nova Scotia. Then sold again to John Beatty. Then abandoned in Maine. Then recovered and auctioned in New York, where Richard Haynes bought her for $1,750. The chronometer shows multiple faces, all different times. Haynes renamed her the Mary Celeste, Heavenly Mary, or Mary of Heaven. He claimed to have spent $8,000 rebuilding her, replacing the keel and most of the hull. But when the ship was seized for unpaid debts, the new owner, James Winchester, discovered Haynes had lied. The Mary Celeste was rotten and needed a complete rebuild costing $11,500. Notice what changes. Right there. The ship that was supposedly rebuilt twice was still falling apart. Winchester stripped the Mary Celeste down to the waterline and built her again, adding an additional deck and changing her tonnage from 198 to 282 tons. He sold a third interest to Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, who would take command for her first voyage under American registry. The chronometer settles on a single, steady time. Briggs was everything the Mary Celeste's previous captains were not. Experienced, respected, financially invested in the vessel's success. A teetotaler and devout Christian who read the Bible regularly. A family man who brought his wife and daughter on the voyage because he trusted the ship and his crew. He personally chose each crew member. Albert Richardson, the first mate from Maine. Andrew Gilling, second mate from New York. Edmund Head, the cook who'd married just before the voyage. The 4 German sailors, including the Lorenzen brothers who'd lost everything in a previous shipwreck. The chronometer ticked steadily, reassuringly. The cargo was dangerous but routine. 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol bound for Genoa. Industrial alcohol, poisonous to drink but valuable for manufacturing. The barrels were stowed carefully in the hold, wedged with wood to prevent rolling in rough seas. But 9 of those barrels were different. Made from red oak instead of white oak, they were more porous, more likely to leak, more likely to release fumes. The chronometer's face darkens. The Mary Celeste and Dei Gratia followed the same route across the Atlantic. Both ships encountered the same violent storms that raged for weeks in November 1872. Both captains noted rough seas, strong winds, the need to batten down hatches and ride out the weather, but only one ship completed the journey. The De Grotia's log shows they kept their cargo hatches sealed throughout the storms. Standard practice when carrying petroleum. Any spark, any buildup of fumes, could cause an explosion. Captain Morehouse took no chances. The chronometer reflects storm clouds. The Mary Celeste's log mentions rumbling in the cargo hold several times. Captain Briggs was aware that alcohol fumes were building up below decks. He knew the danger. He'd invested his own money in the ship's renovation. $10,000, a fortune in 1872. He wouldn't risk his investment, his crew, or his family without good reason. On November 25th, the weather broke. After weeks of storms, the Mary Celeste found herself just 6 miles from Santa Maria Island. Land was visible. Safety was within reach. The chronometer's minute hand quivers. That morning, Captain Briggs made his final log entry. Then he opened the cargo hatches to vent the accumulated alcohol fumes. The ship groaned and creaked as the pressure was released, a sound that would have alarmed anyone unfamiliar with the process. What happened next changed everything. Not. The chronometer shows 8:17. But which 8:17? Morning or evening? November 25th or some other day entirely? The chronometer's face multiplies, showing different times simultaneously. This is where everything changes, not just for Captain Briggs and his family, but for how we understand what happened in those final hours aboard the Mary Celeste. November 25th, 1872. Dawn breaks over the Atlantic. After weeks of violent storms, the weather finally clears. Captain Briggs can see Santa Maria Island just 6 miles away. Land, safety, the end of their ordeal. The chronometer's brass grows cold, but in the cargo hold, something invisible has been building. For 18 days, 1,601 barrels of denatured alcohol have been sloshing in the rough seas. 9 barrels made of porous red oak have been seeping fumes. The ship has been battened down, hatches sealed against the storms. The air below deck has become poison. Dr. Andrea Sella of University College London recreated the Mary Celeste's cargo hold in 2006. She filled it with the same type of alcohol barrels, sealed it for weeks, then opened the hatches. The explosion that followed, invisible, leaving no scorch marks, was powerful enough to blow open heavy wooden hatches and terrify anyone nearby. The chronometer's hands spin frantically. But this isn't just about an explosion. This is about a father's impossible choice. Captain Briggs opens the cargo hatches that morning. The ship groans and creaks as weeks of accumulated fumes escape. The vessel literally deflates, making sounds no sailor had ever heard before. The oil lamps in the cabin flare wildly. Headaches strike the crew immediately. And then Briggs sees his 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, struggling to breathe. The chronometer reflects a child's face. What could make a seasoned captain, a man who'd lost 3 siblings to the sea, who knew the dangers of small boats in rough weather, abandon a perfectly sound ship? Not fear for himself, not concern for his crew, fear for his baby daughter. The alcohol fumes that might make a grown man dizzy could kill a 2-year-old child. Captain Briggs wasn't just a mariner in that moment. He was a father watching his daughter's lips turn blue, her breathing become labored. The chronometer shows a father's desperate calculation. He makes the decision that will haunt maritime history forever. The ship's boat is lowered on the leeward side. A section of railing is removed to make the transfer easier. The bare necessities are gathered. The sextant, chronometer, navigation book, ship's register. But they don't take food. They don't take water. They expect to be back aboard within hours. Sarah Briggs climbs into the small boat, holding Sophia close. The 7 crew members follow. Captain Briggs is the last to leave his ship, as tradition demands. A 300-foot line connects the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste. They need distance from the fumes, but they plan to return once the air clears. The chronometer's minute hand moves backward. The ship's cat, Pooh, is left behind. In their haste to save human lives, no one thinks to rescue the small creature that Sophia loves. This detail, found in no official report but implied by the complete absence of any living thing aboard the derelict, haunts me more than all the theories and investigations. They drift away from the Mary Celeste, watching her sails catch the morning wind. Some sails have been hastily dropped and left on deck. Others still fly, pulling the ship forward. Without crew to adjust them, the Mary Celeste begins to sail faster than the small boat can follow. The chronometer shows wind patterns, weather systems. Archival weather reports for that part of the Azores show what happened next. The morning's calm was deceptive. By afternoon, rain squalls and strong winds whipped up the sea. The Mary Celeste, caught by her remaining sails, pulled away from the lifeboat like a horse breaking free from its tether. The 300-foot line snapped. The chronometer's face cracks. Captain Briggs faced another impossible choice. Try to row back to the now speeding Mary Celeste and risk swamping the small boat in rough seas, or attempt to reach Santa Maria Island just 6 miles away. The wind was blowing against them, out toward the open Atlantic. They chose the island. They had to, with Sophia growing weaker, with the weather deteriorating, with their ship disappearing over the horizon. They turned their small boat toward land and rowed against the wind. The chronometer shows the mathematics of desperation. 6 miles. In calm weather, an easy row for experienced sailors. But the wind was against them, the seas were building, and they had a sick child aboard. Every stroke of the oars fought the Atlantic's inexorable pull toward the open ocean. They never reached shore. The chronometer's hands point in all directions. 9 days later, the Dei Gratia found the Mary Celeste 378 miles east of where she'd been abandoned. The wind had turned the ship completely around. She was sailing back west, back toward the scene of the disaster, as if searching for her lost crew. But by then, the small boat carrying Captain Briggs, his wife, his daughter, and 7 loyal sailors had been swallowed by the Atlantic. No trace was ever found. No bodies. No wreckage. No final message. The chronometer stops at 8:17. All hands frozen. This is what the Mary Celeste teaches us about impossible choices. Sometimes there is no right decision. Sometimes a father's love leads to tragedy. Sometimes the sea keeps its secrets not out of malice, but out of mercy. She closes the drawer with both hands this time. That's when I knew she was done searching. chronometer's face goes dark. But this tragedy, this moment when certainty became doubt, would echo through maritime folklore for generations, creating legends far stranger than the simple, heartbreaking truth. The chronometer measures more than time now. It measures the distance between truth and legend. The chronometer's face shows multiple reflections, like a kaleidoscope. They said it happened once before. A ship found sailing with no crew, her cargo intact, her mystery unsolved. But the Mary Celeste wasn't the first ghost ship. She was simply the one that captured the world's imagination and refused to let go. Within months of the Gibraltar salvage hearing, the story began to change. Facts became fiction. Truth became legend. The simple tragedy of a father's impossible choice transformed into something far more mysterious. The chronometer ticks with the rhythm of printing presses. In 1884, 12 years after the discovery, a young doctor named Arthur Conan Doyle published a short story called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. He changed the ship's name to Mary Celeste, a misspelling that persists to this day. In his tale, a survivor tells of a former slave seeking revenge by killing all the passengers. Notice what he adds: passengers that never existed, violence that never occurred, a survivor who never lived. But Doyle's fiction reignited public curiosity about the real Mary Celeste. Attorney General Solly Flood, who had investigated the case in Gibraltar, reopened his inquiry. He was convinced he'd missed something, that the truth lay hidden in the details he'd overlooked. The chronometer reflects newspaper headlines. The press seized upon every theory, no matter how outlandish. Pirates who took nothing, mutineers who left their belongings behind, sea monsters rising from the depths, underwater earthquakes that somehow left the ship intact while swallowing her crew. But the most persistent legend was the simplest, that the Mary Celeste was cursed. The chronometer shows a ship's wheels spinning endlessly. The evidence seemed to support this supernatural explanation. After her return to New York in September 1873, James Winchester tried desperately to sell the vessel. But her haunted reputation preceded her. No captain would take command, no crew would sign aboard, no cargo owner would trust their goods to a ghost ship. Finally, Winchester sold her at a loss to Cartwright and Harrison. For 5 years, she sailed mostly in the West Indies, carrying routine cargo without incident. But the curse wasn't finished with her. The chronometer's hands move like a ship's compass, seeking true north. In 1879, the Mary Celeste was hired to carry horses around Africa. The animals fell ill during the voyage. Few survived. That same year, while docked at St. Helena, her captain fell ill and died within hours of reaching port. The third captain to meet an unfortunate end while engaged with the vessel. She was sold again, this time to Wesley Gove. After 4 years of losing money, Gove and his captain, a man named Parker, devised a scheme to intentionally wreck the ship for insurance money. The cargo was overinsured. The plan was simple: run the Mary Celeste onto the well-marked reef near Turk's Island. The chronometer shows the mathematics of greed, but even in her final moments, the Mary Celeste defied expectations. The first mate pleaded with Captain Parker not to wreck her on the deadly cliffs of Turk's Island, begging him to choose the nearby reef instead. Parker agreed, perhaps sensing that the ship herself was guiding her own destruction. On her final voyage, the Mary Celeste flew full sail toward the reef. The crew braced themselves as she soared forward, her masts creaking, her hull cutting through the waves one last time. She struck the reef with the force of inevitability. The chronometer's face shatters, then reforms. The insurance investigators saw through the scheme immediately. The cargo was worthless. Rotten fish, rancid ale, and junk. Parker and his conspirators were forced to return the insurance money to avoid charges of barratry, which carried the death penalty. But the curse wasn't finished. The chronometer shows 3 faces, all fading. Within 6 months, the 3 men responsible for the Mary Celeste's final destruction were dead. The owner, the captain, and the first mate, all gone. The 2 vessels chartered by the insurance investigator to examine the wreck were lost with all hands on their very next voyages. This is the part I still think about. Not the mystery of 1872, not the theories or investigations, just how the Mary Celeste seemed to claim lives even after her own death. The chronometer reflects the Spencer's Island shoreline. At Spencer's Island, where the ship was born as the Amazon in 1861, they erected a monument, a stone keel with a bronze plaque marking the connection between a small Nova Scotia shipyard and the most famous ghost ship in history. Local stories say that after the Mary Celeste was wrecked in Haiti, her original builders were offered the chance to buy her remains. They refused. Perhaps they knew something the rest of the world had forgotten. The chronometer shows the ocean floor off Haiti. In 2001, author Clive Cussler and the Numa organization found what they believed were the remains of the Mary Celeste, embedded in the same reef where she'd been deliberately wrecked. Deck nails, copper sheathing, ballast stones. Fragments of a ship that had become legend, but even in death, she keeps her secrets. The artifacts tell us nothing about November 25th, 1872. Nothing about Captain Briggs' final decision. Nothing about what happened to 10 souls who vanished into the Atlantic. The chronometer's reflection shows all the ships that never came home. The Mary Celeste has become synonymous with maritime mystery itself. She's the first ship people think of when they hear the words ghost ship. Her story has inspired countless books, films, and theories. She's been blamed on everything from aliens to Atlantis. But the truth is simpler and more heartbreaking than any legend. A father tried to save his daughter's life. A captain made an impossible choice. 10 people climbed into a small boat on a November morning and were swallowed by the sea. The chronometer shows the face of a 2-year-old child. The Mary Celeste teaches us that some mysteries endure not because they're supernatural, but because they're all too human. Because they remind us that even the most experienced among us can face choices with no right answers. And sometimes the sea keeps its secrets as an act of mercy. The chronometer has stopped measuring time. Now it measures memory, fading like morning mist over the Atlantic. The chronometer's face becomes translucent, like sea glass. I close the Maritime records for the night. The Mary Celeste's file returns to its place among thousands of others. Ships that sailed away and never quite came home. But her story lingers, the way salt air clings to everything it touches. The letter was dated 1913, but it wasn't yellowed. That's how this began, with an impossible detail that demanded explanation. Now, as dawn approaches somewhere over the Atlantic, we understand that some impossibilities are simply truths we haven't learned to accept. The chronometer reflects the first light of dawn. Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs made his choice on November 25th, 1872. Not as a mariner calculating wind and weather, but as a father watching his daughter struggle to breathe. In that moment, the Mary Celeste became more than a ship. She became a symbol of love's terrible mathematics. How do you weigh a child's life against the certainty of the sea? Sarah Briggs climbed into that small boat, holding Sophia close, trusting her husband's judgment one final time. The 7 crew members followed their captain into uncertainty because they believed in his experience, his character, his desperate hope that they could row 6 miles to safety. The chronometer's hands move like oars against an invisible current. They never reached shore. The Atlantic claimed them as it has claimed so many others, not out of malice, but with the indifferent hunger of deep water. Their small boat became another secret the sea would never surrender. But the Mary Celeste sailed on without them, her remaining sails catching the wind, carrying her 378 miles east before the Dei Gratia found her. She had become a ghost ship in the truest sense, a vessel haunted not by supernatural forces, but by the absence of the people who had loved her. The chronometer shows the impression of a child on a small bed. Tonight, you've witnessed the transformation of tragedy into legend. You've seen how a father's impossible choice became maritime folklore, how a simple story of alcohol fumes and rough weather grew into tales of pirates and sea monsters and curses that span generations. The truth is always simpler than the legend, and infinitely more heartbreaking. The chronometer's brass tarnishes, then brightens, then fades. The Mary Celeste teaches us that mystery isn't always about the unknown. Sometimes it's about the unbearable weight of what we do know. That a 2-year-old girl called the ship's cat Pooh. That her impression remained visible on her bed for 9 days after she vanished. That her father chose love over logic and paid the ultimate price. She used to walk with purpose. But tonight, she drifts. And maybe so should you. The chronometer becomes transparent, like water. In the archives, I keep other stories. Other ships that sailed away and never returned. Other families who trusted the sea and found only silence. The Mary Celeste is famous because her mystery captured our imagination, but she's not unique in her tragedy. The Atlantic remembers them all. The chronometer dissolves into sea foam. If you've ever stood at the edge of the ocean and felt its immensity, you understand what Captain Briggs faced that November morning. The sea doesn't negotiate. It doesn't offer second chances. It simply is, vast, indifferent, eternal. But it also carries stories. In every wave, in every tide, in every ship that passes over the spot where the Mary Celeste was abandoned, there's an echo of that impossible choice. A reminder that love sometimes demands everything we have to give. The chronometer's final tick echoes across the water. There's nothing else to do tonight but drift, like the Mary Celeste herself, carrying her secrets into the endless Atlantic. You're safe now. Sleep well. I'll be here when the lights go low again. The chronometer stops at 8:17 and time becomes memory, and memory becomes dream. If you felt the pull of maritime mysteries, let me know in the comments below. The sea holds many secrets, and some are ready to be told. Sweet dreams. The tide is turning,